Today we're going to talk about the geography of Mesopotamia. People began to settle in Mesopotamia about 8,000 years ago, and this is because Mesopotamia possessed some of the best farmland in the ancient world. And the valuable farmland of Mesopotamia allowed ancient hunters and gatherers to quit being nomadic and began to settle in one place. And they eventually start developing farming communities and villages and eventually cities. Mesopotamia means land between rivers in Greek. It is situated between the Tigris and Euphrates River. It's in the eastern Mediterranean, so you can see the Mediterranean Sea on the left side of this picture here. And it's between the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf. From west to east and from north to south, it's between the Zagros Mountains and Arabian Plateau. This is part of the region known as the Middle East. And the Tigris River and the Euphrates River flows into the Persian Gulf, starting at Turkey, going through Syria and modern-day Iraq. And you can see here where the Middle East is located on a world map. So you have your major continents: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica. The Middle East is between Asia, Europe, and Africa. So that would be where Mesopotamia is located today, modern-day Iraq. Mesopotamia is part of the Fertile Crescent. This means that the area possessed fertile soil and farmland, whereas much of the surrounding area is mountainous or desert. The fertile soil and farmland allowed people to settle and farm, as well as herd animals. And due to farming, people began to settle in one place. They give up this nomadic lifestyle of wandering from place to place. There are no longer hunters and gatherers in this location, and eventually they develop cities, as discussed earlier. Mesopotamia is surrounded by desert. It does not get enough rain for farming to be possible. They get under 10 inches of rain a year, and this is not enough to grow crops. So the question is, how does it have this valuable farmland when, in terms of rainfall, it's impossible? And the answer to that is Mesopotamia depended on floods from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and this would make farming possible. The floods of the Tigris and Euphrates would leave behind silt deposits. These silt deposits were good for farming, so it leave behind good soil for farming. And the floods of the Tigris and Euphrates made farming possible, prevent starvation, not only provides them with good soil, but it's also going to provide them with the water needed to water their crops. So the Tigris and Euphrates is also provide a water source. They dug irrigation canals to move the water to the farmland to help grow the crops and bring water to the fields, and also to be stored in reservoirs, which are basically man-made lakes, so they could have water for the dry season as well. In addition to taking water to the fields, they also wanted to divert water away from the fields and away from the villages, because some of these floods could be very devastating, and if they did not divert some of the water away from the fields, this would cause the soil to wash away. It would cause the villages to be destroyed. So they had irrigation systems for watering the crops and taking water to the fields, and also taking water away from the fields and villages. These irrigation systems required a lot of work to build, but also maintain and repair. This results in public works projects, which is one of the main reasons why government started in the first place, where they would use physical labor of the people living in Mesopotamia as a tax to build something that was for the overall good of the community, in this case irrigation, to make farming possible. As I said a little bit ago, the floods of the Tigris and Euphrates were also destructive and unpredictable. So whereas they needed the floods of the Tigris and Euphrates to provide water for farming, the destruction and unpredictability of these floods was also very damaging. They could destroy farmland by washing away the topsoil or just destroying the crops, and they could also destroy villages, which much of the buildings were made out of mud or clay bricks. Sometimes they'd also face long periods of time without flooding, and with rain being pretty uncommon in the first place, this would lead to droughts. Droughts are long periods of time with little or no rain or no flooding. And without flooding or rain, people suffered from famine, which would be widespread starvation, and empires began to crumble, such as one of the most powerful empires early on in Mesopotamia, which is the Akkadian Empire, which many historians believe fell apart due to starvation caused by droughts. They have limited resources in the surrounding areas and limited resources in Mesopotamia, which brought about war. Since valuable farmland was extremely limited outside the Fertile Crescent, people constantly fought wars for control over land and water throughout Mesopotamia. Weapons and warfare became more and more advanced, leading to more violence and greater warfare between various city-states and various groups outside of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia had to constantly fight off invaders from outside Mesopotamia, but they also fought against one another, as some city-states, and we're talking about city-states in future units, attacked other city-states to gain control of neighboring lands and resources. So this would be similar to like York fighting against Seward or Aurora over control of land and resources. These wars, however, were largely seasonal because most cities did not have a standing professional army. Instead, they relied heavily on agricultural workers and farmers, and without having a professional army, they needed to make sure that these people were able to return during the harvest season and the planting season. So these wars took place during non-agricultural seasons, and war during agricultural seasons were less common, because if they did not have the farmers planting crops, then they would starve to death when they returned. So they needed farmers to stay home and farm, otherwise there'd be widespread famine and their city-state would collapse. All right, next unit, we're talking about Mesopotamia's economy. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please email me, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.